All right, well, welcome to those of you who are joining us online to Adult Forum on November 7th here. It's All Saints Sunday. And the scripture for today, if you don't already know, was 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through really 16. And this is, of course, the story where Elijah goes into the wilderness, is fed, and then goes to the Mount of Horeb, where God comes in the sound of sheer silence or a still small voice, depending on the Hebrew translation. So we don't necessarily need to read that since we have done that in worship out loud together. But yeah, we can get started talking either about the text, about All Saints, the combination, whatever we noticed and where we are. And it'll be a little annoying if you talk, I have to give you the microphone, otherwise they'll have no idea what's going on at home. So, look, Mary, there's a seat right here just for you with your name on it. Yeah, it's written in invisible ink. Come on up, yeah. Either way.
The thing that always hits me on this verse and ones like this is how God allowed so many of his prophets to be slain and didn't just smite the king and whoever was going after his prophets with like an unfortunate lightning bolt or fire from the sky or disease or whatnot, and just allowed so much of his church and too many of his followers, especially those who were being very zealous for him, to perish at the hand of these evildoers.
That's a really, really good point, and it's something the church has wrestled with for thousands of years. And there's a interesting Old Testament, New Testament perspective shift. The All Saints' Day originally was meant to honor the martyrs of the early church and throughout the church. And one of the understandings with martyrdom in the early Christian church was it was so obvious that you have your faith, you believe you have a good faith that's really important, and you're being hunted down. So clearly, by seeing the suffering of the people around you, you cannot have this false illusion that, well, if I just have enough faith, God's going to take care of me. That wasn't the thing. It was clear. Jesus was crucified. A lot of the followers were killed. You know, it's not safe to say who you are. You have to speak in code and everything. So the early understanding of Christianity was that the power of darkness, the power of evil was very real, and that God was not, allowing this to happen, that this was a real situation. And even got to the point where some Christians sort of sought out martyrdom to show how faithful they were. That more of a sign of faith was that I'm not afraid in the face of death, rather than God is going to save me from death. So going back to Elijah, we sort of have this idea in the Old Testament that God smited a lot. It's actually not very much in the whole Old Testament. If you took out the passages where God does something smitey, it's a very small amount of time. So yeah, but that is a thing to wrestle with, is how they understood this. Did God allow it? Because the Hebrew understanding was God was the God. There wasn't the devil. They weren't talking about that yet. God was the God, so everything that happened is under God's umbrella. So here you have Elijah and all these prophets being killed. Was God allowing it? Was there a lesson to be taught? I mean, it's interesting to put your brain in their thought. Any other reflections on that?
Well, I think of even today we question in regards to what is going on. We think of COVID and what was going on there. Many people died. But then, as we are going through it, other bits and pieces of light comes through, of good. Our air quality, they noticed right away what cleared. And when I read the scripture here, and these people, these prophets died, and we have a hard time with patience. And what is God going to make out of this situation for the good? And it's only one person, and it's not a multitude, it's a aha moment, a God's wink or whatever, that, hey, yeah, I'm still here, and I see what's going on. And in the end, it's where he goes and anoints the king and does all these other things, and a prophet to replace himself. It seemed to, when I read this, it leads up to that. And so out of what we think is just a horrible tragedy, even in today's life, it's to look for what's God going to do with this situation, and it's to be sensitive to that and just wait and see. And the patience is very hard.
That's great. A couple things you made me think of is in our Tuesday Bible study, we just read about Adam and Eve. Well, Eve, we're focusing on the women, and how when eating of the tree of good and evil, humans are aware of good and evil, but we can't always tell the difference. We don't always have the wisdom. We have knowledge. We don't always have the wisdom. And sometimes something will happen, we think it's bad. It turns out to be for the best. Sometimes something turns out we think this is great, and it's not good for us. So that's the first thing you made me think of, but also the ability that even if God is not in the earthquake and the fire, God is not in something that happens, God can make something good come out of just about anything.
It comes within the silence. It seems to always come within the silence of God. The other chaos is of something else. And when I have experienced that with tragedy and that sort of thing, it's always in the quietness that it's revealed to me.
I think the only thing that confuses me, well, not the only thing, but one thing that confuses me is what is God? Something that God isn't in, and God isn't in something particular. I mean, I almost feel like God's in everything. So that's a little confusing to me. Or he might, maybe he's saying, well, of course, I'm in everything, but I refuse to move something at this particular time or that. It just kind of struck God was not in this, and I'm going, well, I think maybe he's in everything. So that's a little confusing to me.
Well, I only interpreted it as God didn't, there was this strong wind, but God did not reach out to him through that wind. And then there was the earthquake. God didn't reach out to him in the earthquake. He's the creator. He created everything, but he's not using the benches and the chairs to talk to us, so to speak, except for to hold us up as we have this conversation. So these events happened, but they're not how he reached out to them. And then there's that still quiet voice that he reached out in.
That makes sense to me.
And was it a 2x4 that hits you to get your attention?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. There's also a theology of potency, meaning that in certain places, God is thicker. And I've been reading a lot about it's a really cool book that says in places like sanctuaries that have been filled with prayer and song week after week, month after month, year after year, that there is a potency within the sanctuary that sometimes we can dismiss as superstition or, oh, I'm too rational for that. But this is something people have felt. Sacred mountains, Native Americans will say this is a sacred place. That's because that has been a place where they have either felt power or come and gathered for so long for prayer that it's sort of like the energy around that area gets thick with the contact between God and people. And so I wonder if by saying God wasn't in that or God wasn't in that, yeah, God's everywhere, right? But there are some places where God is very intentionally there. You meet God on purpose. God comes to you on purpose. The lighting of a candle, calling on God, God is there in the candle. So I wonder if there's something to do with potency or intention. Yeah.
I was also thinking when you're mentioning that, sometimes we, I think of the scriptures here with, he threw a temper tantrum. He really did. And I'm afraid. And I don't like this. I'm angry. I think of your sermon with grief and to express yourself. And God had to let him settle down. And he also had to get his attention. And then finally we can talk normal to each other. And you're listening now. This is what I want you to do. This is how this all plays out. And it doesn't take, our television, everything is resolved in a half an hour, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, and we just think that that's how it's supposed to be. There are some things that takes years that we've prayed for, years that finally one little baby step has taken place. And it's amazing. But yeah, there are patience again.
Nice. Yeah. I think we sometimes, just a side note, forget the humanity of the people in the Bible. Sometimes we read the Bible so stoically. And Elijah said to the Lord, when in reality, like if it was being acted out, you would actually see the emotions and the feelings that people have throughout the Bible and the humor. There are funny parts to the Bible, but we read it so stoically, sometimes we forget. Yeah. Somebody brought up a good point there's a page where pastors will talk about the upcoming text. And this one pastor brought up and said, I'm just reading this little section on Jezebel and who she is. And we have such negative connotations of Jezebel, right? You will call someone a Jezebel if they X, Y, and Z. They said, but I just stopped and thought about everything from her perspective. She married in to this world or to this place. She brought her own gods whom she was faithful to. Her husband allowed that and gifted her with building worship structures for her gods. And then the prophets of the old gods come and start killing her prophets, killing her priests. So she retaliates. And she does exactly what Elijah ends up doing, where he ends up killing, and it's sort of this bloodbath back and forth. But we're reading it from the perspective of the Israelite prophets. So she's the enemy. But if this was her story, it would be very different. And I thought that was a really interesting point, that we can so easily demonize somebody and point out their awful actions, but when we've done the same actions, it's okay because at least we're on the right side, right? And that's an old history that has happened for thousands of years in human history that I hope we're starting to grow out of. That the actions, regardless of who does them, are either right or wrong. So that killing other prophets may be always wrong, whatever. But I thought that was an interesting thing, and the pastor didn't think she was going to preach on that, because it doesn't necessarily maybe make a lot of sense on All Saints Sunday, but I thought it was an interesting point of how we are getting a version of the story from people, inspired by their relationship with God, but not always 100% enlightened and evolved, right? They were writing from where they were, just as we would be writing from where we were in our stories.
This kind of gets into a little bit, too, of your earlier point about the half-hour, 45-minute segments that we get on TV, and the small snippets of the passages that we typically read in church, where we're not getting the whole story. We came in after all the prophets other than Elijah had been killed off, and now he's running for his life and complaining to the Lord with a valid complaint of, hey, you let all of the rest of our team die, and I'm the last one. What's going on here? Valid complaint to the Lord your God, but we didn't get the rest of the story of who struck first, and under what conditions did they strike, and we may never get the full story this far away from the event.
Yeah, I was never so depressed reading the Bible as when I read the book of Joshua, which is an entire book of genocide. And I was so disillusioned. That was the worst. And yet we tell the story of Jericho like it's this great story. No, it is interesting to realize these are the stories of the people in their time and in their place with their understanding of where God was. And to do our best to understand their story while realizing this isn't necessarily a model for us always. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Reflections, too, on All Saints' Day and any connections you have or significances. This was the very first year that I dug out pictures of my grandparents, put them up on the mantle, got a votive for each one of them, and then lit candles for them on All Saints' Day and then each day throughout the week. And then I just said, come on by. Tell me what wisdom you have for me this week. Be with me this week. What do you have to tell me? And I'd never done that before. It's a deeply Christian thing to do. But of taking some of these beautiful rituals we do in church, but then actually doing them at home was really significant for me this year. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are and what is or isn't meaningful to you on this day.
It just makes me think about, and I've never really made this connection before, so the Day of the Dead, which is the day after Halloween. And isn't Halloween also All Hallows Eve? Okay, so this all kind of ties together. So I'm curious about the origin. So you said All Saints' Day, originated with martyrs. And the Day of the Dead, how is that the same thing? Like, how does all of this fit together? Do you know, or does anybody know?
That's a great question, and you can definitely research this. I think I'm going to throw something out there because Day of the Dead comes from more of a Latino or Hispanic culture, and that's deeply Catholic. But yet a lot of times they wove their Catholicism with ancient folk things that were from before the colonial Catholicism came, just like Christianity did with a lot of pagan rituals. There's nothing wrong with the fact that a Christmas tree was pagan. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we adopted that. It was a good idea, right? It's okay for us to borrow ideas that are beautiful and significant. And so I'm wondering if there wasn't a weaving together in Mexican, and I'm not sure how many other cultures do that, but of taking the All Saints' Day of the Catholic Church and then weaving it in with their own traditions. But what's interesting is that across the world, in various different traditions, something about this week keeps being a place where they think the veil is thin. So it must be a universal, known experience of the people who were in tune to that across the world kept saying, this is the night, this is the time when the veil is thin and you can talk to your ancestors, talk to the spirits, but also, by the way, maybe some not so great spirits might be roaming around a little extra, so let's do a few extra rituals to keep them away. So I find that interesting that I just was learning about Samhain, which is a pagan ritual, and Wiccans and stuff and so forth. It's on the same day. Same thing. They light candles and remember their ancestors. And so I just find that really, really interesting that it's universally felt. Yeah. It's also Diwali. That's the other one. Diwali is the Hindu festival of lights, which actually, if you read the description, I think Diwali is the one. It sounds a lot like Easter. It's sort of like the death of the victory of the light over the dark, and there's a lot of themes that feel very similar. Yeah. So that's cool.
Oh, I was going to say, it's not only just light over the dark, but also knowledge over ignorance.
I know in the Celtic tradition, Samhain falls on what they call a cross-quarter day, which is probably what makes it consistent throughout other cultures too. It's halfway between the equinox and the solstice. So anyone using a solar calendar would run into that. Halfway into the dark.
Well, and I'm also thinking, from what I've learned from the Old Testament, and I haven't read the whole Bible. I've read parts of it, but that's how God came to people, is through what they were believing. And the sacrifice of Jesus. It was a sacrifice. We were sacrificing, and other rituals and gods were, you have to make a sacrifice. And that's how God, to my understanding, came through to the people to be with them and to talk with them and show them that, hey, I truly am the superior one here. But that's how, I think of, if I can remember this right, it was a book, I can't remember the name of it, The Firstborn, I think it was, And it was about a missionary in Africa. And he just could not get through to the people and couldn't figure out how to get through to them. And then it came to him, firstborn. God sacrificed his firstborn to save you. And that hit home because their firstborn was, and we feel that way too, our firstborn is the person. Would we sacrifice our firstborn? And God, that's what God did. And I got to find that book again and read it because it was really good. It was like, wow, that, I couldn't figure it out either until at the end when he said that it was Jesus and the sacrifice of him.
You just made me think that as parents, we will get down and play a game with the kid that they like. And that's how we relate to them. And sometimes kids then are under the impression that you like that game. Have you ever seen those where they ask, what would you give your mom or dad or something? And the kids just can't think that you would want something adult because they can't conceive of that. I remember when I was a little girl in Tanzania and my dad took me to buy a present for my mom, so I'm 7 years old. And we went to one of these roadside, they would have people who carved things, beautiful pieces of art. And so there are all these things, and he says, what do you think Mom would like? And I look, and there's a hippo. Mom would like the hippo. And my dad was even like, are you sure? What about this? And he points to something very boring. And I'm like, no, Mom would like the hippo. Well, I have that hippo now. And I still think about that. But, God is a loving God, and God understands that there's so much we can't comprehend. So God's going to meet us in a way that we can understand. And as that shifts and changes over cultures, and it doesn't mean God doesn't push us. I think God still pushes us beyond. But yeah, definitely. So we'd say, yeah, God likes the little hippo. God would want that. And God's like, yes, I'll it's sweet then when we offer our things because it's from our heart. So, yeah.
There was one other thing that was enlightening. Actually, it happened yesterday. Our daughter was with us, Tia, and we always get talking on things. And she said, Mom, when you and Dad would be in the kitchen when we were growing up, and you were laughing with Jason, I thought you loved him more. She said, then I found out that Jason thought the same thing when we were with her and laughing with her. And I said, oh my gosh, because we felt that we didn't favorize the kids. We tried to be equal, but that's how they saw when they were growing up. That the parents loved this one until they got talking to each other. And they both thought the same thing and didn't realize that until, in the late 30s, early 40s, that this is what they thought. And so children, when they're growing up, perceive things so differently. And I'm glad that when they got older, they could say something. And the enlightenment. I guess that's the excitement that I see, is the enlightenment that God is there and is constantly revealing things to us, and that little light bulb goes on.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's a very good point and that's something we see in many stories and situations, but it's something we keep forgetting. The fact that if we just take a moment for people that we disagree with, and just take a moment to talk about our perspective and their perspective, and letting that person go first, even just to get the ball started. But if we take the time to listen to each other's perspectives, it gives us a moment to get those ahas of, no, mom and dad don't like the sibling more than me. It's just that was the perspective at the time. And it'd be great for you to share with your kids, to have them talk to each other about those things while they're still young, and they can, of course, what they'll understand at the time is.
I already get that question.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, oh no. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, good. Parenthood. Mother, father, parent. Yeah. Yeah. It is a really cool metaphor to think of God as a parent, because as you become an adult and you have those experiences, it just gives you another insight on the fact that we are still limited and we're still growing. There's a lot we don't understand. And yeah.
No wonder he got so mad.
Yeah. Okay. Final thoughts as we wrap up. Anything you want to share?
Just following up on your little altar, did you get any feelings or any wisdom? Or does anyone feel like they've ever really gotten like a sign from someone that they've lost? Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
I love you.
Sweet baby.
Sweet. I did. One of the ways I've realized that I can connect with God in spirit is sometimes I just start talking. It sounds weird. Or maybe it doesn't. You're like, Siri, of course. That's how God would connect with you, is by talking, because I talk a lot. And then all of a sudden I just hear things that aren't me, right? I just start to say stuff, and sometimes. So what I started to do was thank each of my grandparents for what they taught me. And then it was like in the honoring of what they did, ideas would come forward. And I just felt like they were there saying, this is what I want you to learn from my life. This is the wisdom I want you to take. And I got teary-eyed at one point, just as I was speaking in gratitude for what they either taught me or wanted me to learn. And that's how it came through. Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a big learning for me, was that's one of the ways. Sitting in silence is good, but sometimes when I start opening my mouth, I guess that's how it works for me. All right. Well, thank you. Remembering that our spiritual practice this week, which is a good one for any time, is just breathing, finding a time every day to breathe and sit in the sheer silence. Listen for the still small voice. All right. Have a good day, everyone.